Let me start with something most people never say out loud. Some people don't disappear because they hate everyone. They disappear because staying became heavier than leaving. At first, it doesn't look dramatic. They reply a little slower. They cancel plans more often. They stop explaining themselves. And then one day, they're just gone. No arguments, no goodbye, no closure. From the outside, it feels cold, confusing, even cruel. But from the inside, it feels like survival. People who cut everyone off are often labeled distant, arrogant, or emotionally closed. But the truth is usually far more human and far more painful than most people realize. Because cutting people off is rarely the first choice. It's the last one. Most of these people didn't wake up one morning and decide this creates a dangerous pattern. When you don't express your limits, people assume you don't have any, and that's where the breaking point begins. One of the biggest psychological drivers behind cutting everyone off is something called emotional saturation. It happens when someone has given too much for too long without feeling seen, met, or reciprocated. Imagine pouring water into a cup with cracks in it. No matter how much you pour, it never fills. Eventually, you stop pouring, not because you don't care, but because you're empty. These people often replay moments that seem small to others, but felt enormous to them. Being talked over, being forgotten, being contacted only when someone needs something, being praised for being strong instead of being supported. Strength, when it's never allowed to rest, turns into isolation. Another important thing to understand is this. People who cut everyone off usually don't trust partial closeness. For them, relationships feel all or nothing. Either they're deeply invested or they feel unsafe. There's rarely a middle ground. This often comes from past experiences where vulnerability was punished instead of protected. Maybe they opened up once and were dismissed. Maybe they relied on someone who disappeared. Maybe they learned that closeness always comes with pain. So eventually, distance feels safer than disappointment. There's also a quiet grief inside people like this. Not just grief for others, but grief for the version of themselves who used to try harder. The version who believed communication would fix things. The version who waited for people to show up. At some point, they stop explaining, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've already said it too many times. And here's something rarely talked about. Cutting people off doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings a silence so loud it echoes. At first, there may be relief, less tension, less emotional labor, less expectation. But then the loneliness creeps in, because the same walls that keep pain out also keep connection in. Psychologically, this creates an internal conflict. On one side, there's safety. On the other, there's longing. They want connection, but only the kind that doesn't cost them their well-being. This is why many people who cut everyone off struggle with guilt. Not because they regret protecting themselves, but because they still care. They still remember birthdays. They still wonder how people are doing. They just don't know how to return without losing themselves again. Another key factor is identity fatigue. Many of these individuals were placed into roles early in life. The responsible one, the mature one, the emotionally intelligent one, the one who always has it together. Over time, they stop feeling like a person and start feeling like a function. Walking away begins to feel like the only way to rediscover who they are, without expectations attached. Silence becomes a form of self-definition. There's also a subtle perfectionism at play. People who cut everyone off often hold themselves to impossible emotional standards. They don't want to show up halfway. They don't want to be inconsistent. If they can't be fully present, they'd rather not be present at all. So instead of showing up messy, tired, or unsure, they disappear. Not because others don't deserve effort, but because they believe they must earn their place by being enough. This mindset is exhausting. Eventually, disappearing feels easier than disappointing. From a neurological perspective, chronic emotional stress can push the brain into a protective state. The nervous system learns that connection equals overwhelm, So withdrawal becomes regulation. This isn't weakness, it's adaptation. But adaptation without healing eventually becomes isolation. One of the saddest truths about people who cut everyone off is this: many of them still deeply value relationships. They just don't trust their ability to have them without losing themselves. They're not emotionally numb, they're emotionally overloaded. They're not cold, they're tired. They're not heartless, they're protecting what's left of their heart. And often they're incredibly self-aware. They notice patterns, they notice emotional imbalance, they notice unhealthy dynamics long before others do. But awareness without boundaries turns into resentment. So instead of confronting, negotiating, or asking for change, they choose the cleanest exit they know: silence. Because silence doesn't argue back. Silence doesn't misunderstand. Silence doesn't demand more. But silence also doesn't heal. The danger comes when cutting everyone off stops being a phase and becomes an identity. When self-protection turns into avoidance. When solitude stops being restorative and starts becoming isolating. Some people convince themselves they're better alone because they've never experienced safe connection. Others confuse independence with emotional exile. And deep down, many of them are still waiting. Not for apologies, not for explanations, but for proof that connection doesn't always require self-erasure. The psychology of people who cut everyone off isn't about cruelty or indifference. It's about boundaries learned too late, needs ignored too long, and strength that was never allowed to be soft. They didn't leave because they didn't care. They left because caring cost them too much. And in the quiet they create, they're often trying to answer one question they've avoided their entire life. How do I stay connected without disappearing inside myself? There's no easy answer, but that question is where healing begins. Final message: if someone disappears from your life, don't assume they didn't care. Sometimes they just couldn't carry the weight anymore. And if you see yourself in this story, remember this: having boundaries is not selfish. Protecting yourself is not weakness. You're not broken for needing rest.